pop quiz. What have we been talking about the last 2 weeks?
What is love?
What is love?
Baby, don't hurt me.
Baby, don't hurt me. Not exactly. But, close. What is love? Talking about what does the Bible have to say about love? Because in our culture, in our society, there's a lot of different ways that love is described. A lot of different ways that it's explained. Some good, some not so good. And so it's important to see what the Bible has to say about it. But instead of me telling you guys what we talked about last week, I finally remembered to bring down the recap chair. So it's recap chair time. So, hold on one sec. You might not like the thing I say. You might not be ready for it. You ready? All right, so 2 weeks ago, Spencer Sherlin came. Sorry. Spencer Sherlin came, the guy who leads our young adult group. Oh, he did a great job. What did he talk about? Does anybody remember? If you, yep, anybody, you can come on down to the recap and give her a round of applause. Recap chair. Now you gotta come to the recap chair. Yes.
The recap chair is amazing.
It is. It's so comfortable. It's the only chair like that in the
It is
entire,
the only comfortable chair.
in the entire church.
Hi guys.
What did we talk about?
We talked about singleness and how singleness is okay and that God uses us during singleness. And we also talked about like how relationships are good, but sometimes it's okay to be single. It's okay to be single, and some people are meant to be single, and some people are meant to be married.
Awesome. Give her a round of applause. Thank you very much. All right, so in the first week of our What is Love series, we talked about singleness. Talked about how a lot of times at church or just in general, you view it as something that's bad that we shouldn't have. But a lot of people, it's actually good for, and it's the best things for them. You can focus on serving God more than you would a relationship and maintaining your efforts there. You're able to have lots of friendships that you can pour into and show love in that way. It's a great opportunity. It's a great blessing for some people. Now, last week, there's two people. We'll do Colin. Last week, what did we talk about Colin? Give him a round of applause. He came down to the recap chair. Colin, what did we talk about last week?
So last week we talked about marriage and sex.
Yes.
And what does marriage and sex look like? What does God say about it in the Bible? And what marriage and sex as Christians, how does that relate to us and what we're called to do? I also forget, we talked about a word, but I forget the name of the word. But it was talking about, we looked at how Christian wives should act and how Christian husbands should act and the differences between that and Submit, that was the word.
That was one of the words that we talked about, yes.
And we also talked about how wives should not be controlled by their husbands, and it should be a dual language. And I think Kyle, you mentioned it in the small group.
Finger pits.
Finger pits. How a marriage is supposed to shine light on God and is supposed to.
So basically, the whole thing with the finger pits is that this is you, right? Or let's do it on this one. This is you, right? Okay. The tip is God. So if you're single in a relationship, it's you and God. You should be striving to get towards God. This is the person that you're dating or supposed to marry, right? So they're here and it's still connected to God. But when you come together in a marriage, your marriage should be pointing up towards God. So as you grow together closer, you're also growing together with God. You're growing closer to God, right? Finger pits.
Yeah.
Nice. There we go. Good job, Colin. That was good. Last week we talked about what is marriage, and then ultimately with marriage, what is sex, and why is that good? A lot of times in culture, we kind of put shame on those things, make it seem like it's not good, or we do things that aren't actually correct. So we took some time to really talk about why does the Bible say it's actually good? And yes, marriage between a wife and a husband, it's mutual love and respect. Yes, you did.
Because God said it was good.
Because God said it was good. God created it, and God made it good, and He also defined it. Yes, yeah.
Does that mean we're all like cousins? Because that would be
Even closer than that, because no.
Yes, even close enough because of Noah, but we're not going to get into that right now. If you want to talk about that, we can talk about that afterwards. But both marriage and sex are good. Marriage is supposed to be a loving relationship where the wife, yes, is submitting, but it's out of gentle love and respect coming alongside her husband, but then at the same time, the husband is treating his wife just as Jesus was willing to die for the church. So it's mutual love and putting the other's interests above each other, but there are different roles that are still relevant to today. Then sex is the demonstration of that love in a unique way that only is supposed to happen in marriage, where there's that oneness, that closeness, and that trust that can't be found anywhere else. Now this week, we're going to be continuing the series and talking about more of the negative side of things in culture. Talking about the war for our hearts, because if you didn't realize it, there is a war going on for your hearts. Now you know. But, what?
Sorry, I was like, war, like that's a card game.
It is a card game. But we are not playing a card game today.
Right.
So today we're going to be really talking about the idea of how is sex, which is good, being corrupted in our culture, corrupted in some cases in our own lives. Now, as we're talking, we'll use the word sex and some other words too. If you are triggered by those words, I'm not going to be ignorant that some people might have experienced some type of trauma. Feel free to step out. That's no shame. It's perfectly fine, and the leader would be happy to sit next to you and listen or talk or whatever you need. But today, we're going to start things off with a little bit of story time. Does anybody know what this is?
A bucket of ice.
It's a bucket of ice. Does anybody remember a challenge that happened?
The ice bucket challenge.
Ice bucket challenge. What happened with the ice bucket challenge?
You got ice bucket dumped on your
Someone
head.
drowned.
Yes, and you would dare the next person. So it was a whole thing. What? It was supposed to raise money. I think it actually did raise a good amount of money.
For some people.
Some people just got really cold. So around that same time, I was volunteering at a summer camp called Word of Life. Some of you might know about it. But I was working at their ranch in their kitchen, and it was epic. So on my what?
What'd you make?
I made lots of food. I made like vats of mac and cheese that you had like a canoe paddle and stir thing. It was great.
Wait,
So
That's very satisfying. Yeah.
I volunteered in a kitchen. Yeah. Nice. So, wow, there, all right, everybody focus back in. This is just the beginning of this. We haven't even gotten to the story yet. We haven't even gotten there yet. So, on my last day that I was working there, because I left a little bit early so I could have some free time before school started back up, because you might want to be able to just go out and enjoy some summer off in the world. But on my last day, it was during the lunch hour, I had a little competition that started with one of the chefs involving an ice bucket. We both thought that the other person couldn't dunk the other one with an ice bucket during the lunch shift. Somehow that competition started. Don't quite know how. But so for the rest of the lunch shift, we were trying to dunk each other with buckets of ice with limited success. You see, he started scooping out ice. He was a younger guy, Chef Chad. He's cool. But his name was actually Chef Chad. That's not a joke. But he was scooping up ice and put it in 5-gallon buckets, and he was hiding it throughout the kitchen. And so I would just wait for him to do all the heavy lifting and work. And I would just go around and I would move the ice buckets to different locations so I would know where they were and he wouldn't. We were playing this whole little game basically. Until he started filling up and then he turned to do something for a second. I was like, I'm going to take it out right from underneath him right now. It's going to be great. So I went and I reached in and I tried to grab the bucket, but he turned at the last second, grabbed it. So we're both pulling over this bucket. We're pulling. It's getting higher. And I think to myself, not yet. I think to myself, I am never going to have a better opportunity than right now to dunk this man with a bucket of ice. So I take my other hand, I flip it right over him, douse him with water. He is soaked. Everybody's like stunned silence and everybody just busts out laughing. However, revenge comes. And so he got changed and he came back and he enlisted the entire kitchen's help to get back at me. And so at the end of the shift, he said, Stephen, I want you to, because we had to clean up and stuff, and so one of the things is you have to take out the trash. Nobody necessarily wants to do it, but it's fine. So I start taking out the trash, and I bring it out back, carry it out, and there's a whole dumpster area. So I go to throw it away. I see one of my friends up there in the corner with his phone out. I'm like, I know what you guys are doing. I'm not going over there. So I throw the trash bag over, and I say, I'm not coming in. I know you're going to get me with water. I know you're going to dump ice on me. And I walk away, go back into the kitchen. No sooner do I get back in there, the back doors bust open. Two of the guys run in with an ice bucket in both of their hands. They charge at me, so I run out the front, turn the corner, guess what's there?
Another ice bucket?
More ice buckets, like 3 ice buckets right there. Somehow during the entire shift, this is a big boat. There's like a gym, there's a whole eating area, he had hidden ice buckets throughout the entire building so that they could be stationed around. So I run to the gym, more ice buckets there. I run back. One of the guys tries to chuck ice at me. I narrowly dodge. He makes a whole mess and kind of gets on himself. I'm all good. So we're running around. Eventually, after some failed attempts, I make it outside, and the only one with a bucket left is Chef Chad running after me. And so it's down to wire. I've visited every single ice bucket. It's the final one. And so he throws it at me, barely miss. I run off, like he described, as a gazelle. And I made it out with my last pair of clean clothes and didn't get wet because I didn't have any clothes to change into. But I successfully evaded the ice buckets. So revenge was avoided that day. It was a pretty epic moment in my life, a lot of fun, but also vaguely terrifying when people come around corners carrying ice buckets trying to throw them at you. But why do I say that story? Because temptation and sin is kind of like those ice buckets. You see, those ice buckets, they are all over the place. They seem to appear out of nowhere at times, and they could be around any corner. It felt like somebody could strike at any moment. And they seem to be sometimes places I expected them, like in the kitchen, or unexpected places like the gymnasium. They could have popped up at any moment. And during that whole escapade, it felt like there was no escape, even though I did make it out. But it did not feel like I could escape. And temptation often feels like that. Like there is no escape, like it could appear at any moment around any corner, and it feels like there is no escape. But the good news is that there is a way of escape. And this all is especially true when it comes to sexual temptation. Because that type of temptation is like temptation to the nth degree, because it has hormones and emotions and all these thoughts and different feelings that come into that make it even more challenging to fight against, to avoid, to get away from, to escape. The truth is, if we're going to do some statistics and stuff, we have all probably faced this in some level. Since we all live in America, right? Last time I checked? Yes. Mostly. Then probably every single one of us has been exposed to pornography. Whether it's on a billboard, whether it's on some random magazine, or a Super Bowl halftime show, or a commercial, or whatever else have you. We've all been exposed to it. Another statistic, I'm not actually giving the numbers, but probably the majority of the people in this room, or all, have faced some type of sexual temptation in some level. And those things are important because if you don't hear anything else tonight, I want you to hear two things. First, you aren't alone. First of all, God is with you even in the midst of your temptations. He does not abandon you. But also with sexual temptation, it is often very easy to feel like everybody is against you. It's easy to feel like you are trapped and alone, and you just feel guilt and shame like there is no escape. But the truth is that you aren't alone, and that probably everybody that you think would judge you has gone through pretty much the same thing. So find somebody you can trust, a trusted Christian that you can talk to, because you aren't alone. And the second thing, just like I escaped from the ice buckets, you aren't trapped. There is a way of escape. You do not have to be feeling like there is no way out from guilt and shame. You can be freed from that. We're going to be talking about this today. We're going to be talking about specifically in a specific story in the Bible that probably some of you are familiar with, about King David. Now, King David, he's a man after God's own heart. He's basically like, in the Old Testament, a lot of people look up to him. You compare yourself to him. He led his people very well and followed God in pretty much every way, except for the way that we're going to be looking at today, where he messed up pretty bad. And so we're going to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 11. It's in the Old Testament, so towards the beginning of your Bibles. If somebody finds it in the blue Bibles, shout out the number. 149. So what we're going to see here, so David, he messes up pretty bad, but we can learn a lot from what he did wrong to be able to see how we should act differently. Then we can also see, by the way that he responds after he's made this mistake, we can see how we should respond as well. So it looks like we're all there. We're going to read straight through the first 5 verses. Then you guys are going to get to talk together and figure out some things. So you guys are going to want to pay attention. So in verse 1 of chapter 11 it says, "In the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab," that was his head general, "and his servants with him in all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon, when David arose from his couch and was walking on the roof of the king's house, that he saw from the roof a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent and inquired about the woman, and one said, 'Is not this Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?' So David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she had been purifying herself from her uncleanness. Then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived, and she sent and told David, 'I am pregnant.'" So in this moment, David messed up royally, not just because he was a king, but it was a pretty big mistake. And I can imagine if David was looking back at this moment, he would be asking, where did I go wrong? Where did I mess up? What should I change? Where should I have stopped myself? What I want you guys to do is get in groups of like 2 or 3, the same groups that you guys, we'll do the same groups that you guys were in for your prayer groups. I want you to tell me, where did David mess up in the story? We're going to write your responses on the whiteboard. So break out into groups. You don't have to move. You can just turn to the people next to you. And we're going to hear from every single group. Where do you think David messed up? It doesn't have to just be the first time he messed up, but any spot that you feel like he messed up.
I think that's pretty good.
Was she married? Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
I think that's
Only the execution is and then he found out, but then, like, well, did he know that she was married?
He finds out that she's married in verse 3, then sends messengers first.
So then the messenger.
Yeah, that's wrong. Yeah.
Why is he sending messages to Imagine just like showing my house and then we show and it's like, Joe Biden actually goes like, hey, you want to have dinner with us?
What, Mom?
Alright, you guys are going to have limited time. I realize that my phone is being used for so I can't talk like Alright, you guys have a minute to figure out where did David mess up. Yeah. We'll see.
I was inside school.
There's people like Sydney.
Timmy?
And then
They call me Bush now.
30 seconds.
You have to figure out everything theologically with this.
Are you going group by group?
I'm going group by group. I'm going to hear from every single group.
They make a big decision about it. No, they make a decision to close the school.
Alrighty. So, we are going to hear from every single group. You must all prepare a response. First, where is the group over here? Was this all one group?
No, I'm with CJ.
Okay.
It was us.
Alright, so right here, what did we get, or just tell me one of the ways that David messed up.
He sent messengers or after he was
Not exactly. He did not know that she was married until after he sent the message.
No, he did. He inquires about her in verse 3 and sends the messengers in verse 4.
My apologies.
Oh, let's go.
I stand corrected. This is why you guys need to study your Bibles, because I can say something like that, or it could be worse, and I can mess it up. So he sent messengers after he knew his message was married. That's
You want to go?
send
What do you mean?
messengers.
Okay. I'll say something you can follow along.
And we'll know that's after he was married. He knew. Right, Colin.
he gave into the temptation of lust.
All right, what is lust? Define lust for everybody.
Lust is basically like he only looked at the physical attributes of Bathsheba.
Mhm. This is important. We're going to talk about the distinction of lust versus other things, but lust is a strong sexual desire that when you see somebody, you're really considering them sexually and basically objectifying them. But, CJ, you were also in the same, wait, no, you guys are in the same group, right?
Yeah, but he was gonna add something.
So you're going to add something to that same thing.
Well, like, he also had sex with, like, before marriage.
Yes, he also actually had the actual act of sex. So he had sex outside marriage. All right. Where's the next group here?
It was me.
All right.
We
The
just,
three of you then. We skipped over CJ.
Yeah.
All right.
we just said that like he gave him like sexual temptation.
All right. He gave into sexual temptation. So we're gonna say he gave in. He didn't really fight against it at all, did he? Like there's no evidence that he's like fighting against or feeling any conviction or fighting against that conviction. Yeah. So he just kind of gave in, it seems. All right. I think we have one final group here. What do we got?
Looking at the woman bathing.
Looking at the woman bathing. All right.
It's just creepy.
It's just kind of creepy.
Wait, how can we just see that?
All right, just to clarify though, because I hear some people asking, how could he have seen Bathsheba? Well, guess what? How tall are palaces? Very tall. How tall are normal buildings?
Less tall.
Less tall. So even if she was in an enclosed courtyard, which she probably was, we don't know exactly, it doesn't
Wait, she was
say.
outside?
But we can, they didn't have indoor plumbing. So they would have used pools of water. So, I know there was a time you could not just turn the faucet and have a nice bath inside. So she would have been bathing outside, which was the normal. What?
Like in the rain?
There's no evidence of rain.
He's probably sitting in like a little
Yeah,
tub
I would have done
outside.
that.
So she's bathing. Yeah. And David is in an elevated position, so he would have been able to see her where other people wouldn't have. So to answer your question, that's why she wasn't just bathing to try and like attract some random man across the street or something. That's not what she's doing there. In fact, she's actually trying to honor God because she's trying to follow the cleanliness laws. We're not going to get into those today, but if you want to talk about those more, come and find me afterwards. You guys hit the nail on the head pretty good with this whiteboard. Just to make sure we hit everything, we're going to go into more detail about each of these things and kind of go through in order. So, David messes up in several areas. It's not just the physical action of sex. He actually messes up long before that point. So first, he's in the wrong place. Is it a sin that he was at the palace and not at war? What do we think? No, it's not really a sin. You could argue maybe because he's the king, he's supposed to lead his people. So that's not really good he's not with his army. It could have been more of a pride thing, or maybe he just felt lazy or tired. We don't really know. Maybe a sin, maybe not, but still, he put himself in a poor situation where he ended up getting tempted, where if he had been in the right place, he wouldn't have fallen into this temptation. A lot of times, when we face temptations, we put ourselves in situations where we face temptation really strongly. So it's important for us to realize, all right, what circumstances or situations do I find myself in where I'm going to be really tempted? And it's probably a good idea to avoid those situations. Now, does that mean that we avoid every single tempting situation? What do we think? Do we avoid every single place that we might be tempted? No, why not? Say it loud and proud. We'll be tempted anywhere. You could be tempted anywhere, any place. So if you were going to avoid every place that you could be tempted, you would be like a monk up on a hill, avoiding everything, and you could still be tempted there. So yes?
Like Jesus was tempted in the wilderness.
Yeah, even Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. He didn't sin, but he was tempted. Now, for us, so that doesn't mean avoid every tempting situation because we're supposed to be preaching the gospel, reaching the world, even if we're being tempted. But it's a good idea if you know you're probably going to fall into sin if you go to some place or a certain situation. Find a Christian who's maybe able to go to that place and speak the gospel, reach those people, who's not going to be as easily falling into temptation. So that's where David kind of went wrong first. Next place, he lusted in his heart. Colin, what did you say was the definition of lust again?
it was only focusing on physical attributes and kind of treating people like objects, like you
Yeah.
said.
Yes, it says it happens in the mind. And Jesus actually says later, he describes and says, if you look at a woman and you lust over her, you have committed adultery in your heart. He's saying it's the same thing as if you had actually had sex with her. And for females, if you had sex with him, it's the same thing. It's just as bad because your motivations matter. And so David messed up here. Now just to clarify something. David's strolling out on his palace, right? He's just looking around, probably surveying a city, accidentally sees a woman, and we can imagine, maybe it doesn't say in the text, but he sees her and immediately looks away. Was that a sin, if he did something like that? What do you think? No, why not? It was an accident. There was no sinful intent there. He did, if we're reading into this, in this case, this good scenario, he didn't lust over her, he didn't consider it, continue to think about it and dwell on it and imagine and fixate on it. He didn't take, quote unquote, a second glance. You know he actually did. But there's a difference there, because last time I checked, each of you have probably been attracted to somebody. You've looked at somebody and said, you know what, that person is beautiful, or that person looks pretty handsome, and I might actually want to date that person. Is that wrong to feel that way towards somebody? No. That's actually okay. God created us with emotions and attractions. These things are good. It becomes wrong when you, quote unquote, take that second glance and really lust over their physical being, desire them sexually, make them objects of your own mind. That is when it becomes a problem. When you're longingly looking at somebody sexually. And that's when it becomes lust in your heart. And that's a fine line. It's not as clear cut as I maybe just made it sound. And talk about it more in your small groups, because that can be really difficult to figure out, and it can be very hard, especially if you're tempted in this area, to try and basically turn off your brain at certain points. So talk with your leaders about that more when you get into small groups. So he messed up. He lusted in his heart. He was in the wrong place. He ignored the warning. What did his messengers tell him? The first ones, the first people that went out. What did they tell him? Not CJ, somebody else. What did the first people that he went and sent tell him? Yes, Ava.
She was married.
She was married. Now, she was not just married to anybody. This is what, you guys know, like, when the Bible where it has, like, a list of people and, like, all that stuff, and you kind of skip over it because it's just a bunch of names? Those things are actually really important. Because in the not genealogy, but in the list of people at the end of this book, we find out who her husband is. He is Uriah the Hittite. Does anybody know who Uriah was?
Was he a king?
No. Johnny.
He was a soldier who was on the front lines at the time.
Yes, he's not just any soldier, though. He is one of David's mighty men. He's one of the most loyal, honorable soldiers that David has. This is his wife. And we can kind of infer a little bit because her father has the same name as one of the other mighty men. So she might have been the daughter of one of the other mighty men. Not only married to one, but also the daughter of one. And we find out that her father, if that is her father in that list, was the son of one of David's greatest advisors. So David should have known, regardless, that this woman is married. She's at the very least, we know for a fact, the husband or the wife of one of my most honorable soldiers. I should respect that. I should honor that. But he doesn't. He ignores that warning. He ignores what we can imagine maybe conviction. When we're faced with temptation, especially sexually, it's really easy to give in to our impulses, give in to our sudden urges or desires. And each time you say no to the Holy Spirit, each time you say no to conviction, it oftentimes becomes easier each and every time, and it becomes a slippery slope. On the other side, though, each time you say no to sin, it's a victory. And it can sometimes, a lot of times, become easier each time. But when you are convicted, when you feel, you know, this is wrong, that's a warning. So alarm bells should be going off. Take a step back, get away, flee, run from whatever situation you're in. Avoid it, close whatever you're doing down, get out, run away. Maybe not literally run out of your house, but get out of that situation. So long before he committed any sexual, physical act, he had sinned. And he ended up actually having sex with somebody that was not his wife, who was married to somebody else, and ended up, they got pregnant. And he committed sin. He did all these different things. And you see, sin, it wasn't just one thing in this moment. It was a domino. where each mistake led to another sin, which led to another thing, which got bigger and bigger. It spread until eventually it threatened to consume him, and it blew up in his face. Sin is like a domino because it doesn't really stop with one. One sin leads to another, which leads to another, and each time it seems to get bigger and badder in a sense. And this is especially true with sexual temptation, because when you are struggling with thoughts in your head, it may start there, a lingering thought that happens. But then suddenly that doesn't give you the satisfaction and enjoyment that it used to. And so you go to more physical avenues, like masturbation or pornography, where you're starting to view things. It gets bigger, it starts to spread. Suddenly those things don't please you as much, and it grows and grows until it becomes an addiction. It becomes an addiction that's as addictive as any drug. You see, sexual enjoyment, it releases dopamine into your brain, which makes you feel happy, makes you feel good. It makes you addicted to whatever is giving you that dopamine rush. And that's especially dangerous when your brains are developing. It can cause a lot of harm. We're going to talk about how that causes harm in a little bit. But it spreads and becomes more and more dangerous and really hard to get out of. Sin, it's like a domino. And for David, it kept on going even after this point. We're not going to read all the verses. But so right now, David finds himself in a situation where the person he had sex with, Bathsheba, is now pregnant. That's not good for the honor of a king to have gone behind the back of his most honorable soldier. So he decides to have a little scheme. And he calls Uriah back from the front lines and says, all right, here, what's going on? Give me some updates. He says, all right, great. Go home to your wife. He wanted to make it look like the baby was actually his. Uriah's actually a really good guy. And even though David tries to do this twice, Uriah says, all my fellow soldiers, my friends, my fellow Israelites, they're in tents, away from their families. Even the Ark of the Covenant, the thing of God, is in a tent. I'm not going home to my wife. That would be dishonorable. It would not be right. So he stays outside of his house, outside, not going back home. David's scheme fails, so then he resorts to murder. He tells Uriah, here's a letter. He sealed it. Uriah couldn't read it, and he brings back the letter to Joab, the commander, and it says, send Uriah into the heaviest point of fighting. So he's fighting up against the wall of the city, and it says, once he's in the middle of the fighting, have the rest of the army pull back, the army that was with him at that point, pull back and let Uriah die. Uriah had no idea that he was holding his own death note, and David sends him to his death, and then marries Bathsheba, and he thinks that he has hidden all of his sin. But it says at the end of the chapter that the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. And that's not just any name of God, that's Yahweh, the great I am, the creator of the universe, noticed, and he was not very pleased. Sin is a domino. Be careful when it comes into your life and fight against it. Don't let it have a foothold, because it becomes so dangerous. And sin, it has consequences. How are we doing on time? All right. I'm just going to summarize this with having you guys talk about it. But sin has consequences. David thinks he's made it scot-free. He's good to go. He's going to have his baby. He's got a new wife. Perfectly fine. Well, God sends a prophet. And the prophet's name is Nathan. And he comes up to David and he tells him a story. He says, there was a man who had thousands of sheep. All his own. And a man came in and he wanted to throw a feast for the man. And so that would have required him killing one of his sheep. But instead of taking one of his thousands of sheep, he turned and found a poor man who had just one sheep. And he killed that man's sheep, stole it away, and used that for the feast instead. David, a former shepherd, now king, is enraged because Nathan made it sound like it was a true story. And he says, that man deserves to die. He took what wasn't his. He took something that was precious in the eyes of another, took from somebody who was less fortunate than his own, took it and slaughtered it. And he said, that man deserves to die, but he should have to pay fourfold for his mistake. And Nathan looks right at David and says, you are that man. That's like a drop mic moment, if there's ever one in the Bible. Like, he literally looks at the king and says, you are the one who messed up. So David convicts himself. And his consequences actually end up being really, really big. He does have to pay back 4 times. He ends up, just as he sent Uriah to the sword, 3 of his children end up actually dying in conflict with one another in his own house. One of his children, one of those 3, actually raises up an entire rebellion against David and throws him out for a time and makes himself king instead before he is overthrown again and killed. But not just them. The child that Bathsheba and David had would die not soon after it was born. David had to live with the shame and regret, the dishonor, which in this day and age was worse than death, but also as a father had to see his family torn apart by the continued sin that he did. Sin has consequences. For us, we might not send our families into a bunch of war and battle, if you have families, but sin has consequences, especially sexual sin, because it hurts yourself. Like I said, it's an addiction. It changes literally the way that your mind thinks. It can make it so that, first off, you try and solve anxiety or fears with whatever this temptation is, and that just leads to more anxiety and fears so that you just continue to spiral in that way and become addicted to it. But also it hurts you and how you can trust other people, because it makes you feel like you're alone, you're separate. There's no way that people would accept you if you opened up about this dark secret. But also, it especially hurts how you view other people. That hurts your relationship with others. That trust that you feel like you can't have with other people. But also it hurts how you see, especially the opposite sex, because they become objects in a lot of ways. You see them as just objects for your own sexual desires, and it's really hard to get out of, especially once you've gone down that road. There is a way of escape. It takes time and effort. And it hurts your relationship with God. We're not going to read the passage, but later in 1 Corinthians it says that our bodies are meant to glorify God. Do not bring them to sexual immorality. Do not commit sin in this way. That's like joining God with a prostitute, the Holy Spirit living inside of you. It is evil. It is not good. Sin has consequences. Now, what do you think? Well, actually, we did that part. Never mind. How do you think David responded to this? What do we think? There's some options. How do we think David responded to these consequences? To Nathan coming up and talking to him. Yes, CJ.
Has him killed.
David has Nathan killed. You think that could be an option? David's the king. He could say, "I don't like what you said. You're dead." That's an option.
He tries crawling back to God.
He could try crawling back to God, trying to earn his way back in a sense. That's one option. He could try and view it that way. There's a lot of different ways that could happen. David doesn't do either of those things in a sense. He doesn't try and earn his way back to God because he can't. He doesn't have somebody killed because of his own mistakes after this point. He's realized his own sin. It says at the end of chapter 12, he comes before Nathan. He says, "I have sinned against the Lord." He doesn't make any excuses. He doesn't try to say, "Well, she shouldn't have been there. I should have been. Somebody should have warned me. He doesn't make excuses. He confesses his sin and asks for forgiveness. And if you guys want to read it later, in Psalm 51, we're not going to read it today. It's a whole song and prayer from David after this event. He is coming before God and saying, I have messed up. I've sinned terribly before you. He doesn't just ask for forgiveness, though. He says in that passage, "Create in me a clean heart and renew a right spirit within me." He said, "God, give me the power of the strength to change. Restore me. Make me clean, because I know you can." David deserved to die. In reality, each one of us for our sin deserve that too. We're all rebellious sinners, but God doesn't do that. He's willing to forgive us. And so it's important to remember how we respond, because when you face any temptations, especially this type, how you respond matters, because it's easy to just say, "Well, I'm filled with this guilt and shame. There's no way I can escape. There's no way I can get out. There's no reason that God would actually forgive me." It's easy to think that way. It's easy to say that. It's even easy to say, "I'm going to make the strategy so I can get out of this temptation. I won't ever fall into it again. I'm going to do this and that, and I'll be fine." But if you don't have a foundation with God, that will fall apart. The only way that we can escape, the only way that we can respond well, is to come before God and say, God, I've sinned. God, there is no way I can escape this on my own. You are the only way that I can be saved, the only one who can forgive me. God, you can give me wisdom and strength to overcome. You can lead me through this. But it's not just one moment, it's a relationship with God. David is a man of God. He had a relationship with God, built multiple times. God will give you the power to overcome. But we are called to intentionally fight for our faith, and you can't be complacent. There is a war for our hearts. You're called to fight for it. You're going to talk more about that in your small groups. But we know that the ultimate battle has been won because Jesus has saved us, and that is why we can fight against it. Some practical steps as we close. First, learn boundaries. Like we said before, know what situations tempt you the most. But then have accountability. Yes, God is there with you, and He will strengthen you to overcome, but He's also given you other Christians to help you fight against sin and temptation. Find a trusted Christian, whether it's a peer, whether it's somebody older than you. Find somebody that can hold you accountable, confront you, and encourage you. Know Scripture beforehand. Have it written out, have it on your phone, have it around you that you can help you fight temptation. My favorite one is in Corinthians where it says, do you not know that there is no temptation that is not common to man, but with that temptation God has made a way of escape. It means that there is a way of escape from every temptation, and that you are not alone with that temptation. When you are tempted, take a step back. Don't stay in that situation. Take a step back, pray, refocus your mind on God and what He says is right. But all these steps, all these strategies will fall short if you don't have a relationship with God, if you don't have that foundation. That's the most important thing. A daily relationship with God, being in His Word, praying to Him, living side by side with Him each day will give you a foundation. It's not easy. It does take work to overcome temptation. But it's something that's so worth it. And it's so much better to live free of guilt and shame. And even if you have fallen short in this area, there is forgiveness. And God can restore you. And you don't have to feel alone or trapped. Let's pray, and then we're going to break out into small groups. Dear God, I thank you that you have saved us, God, that you have come, that you have saved us, you have freed us from sin. We don't have to live in shame and guilt because you have freed us, God. It doesn't mean that we go out and sin more because we can just be forgiven, but we know that because we are forgiven, we should change and seek to serve you more and more, God. I pray that we would go from here and that we would fight boldly against our temptations, our sin, knowing that you have already won the ultimate battle. And all God's people say, amen.